Today's story is from Alison and starts when she moves into an old Victorian house in Inverness in Scotland. Not long after we moved in, she says, my husband and I would wake in the night to a giant thud coming from the kitchen. It would repeat several times with a few minutes between each thud. We checked the pipes, but there was nothing, so we just kind of accepted it was an old house and made peace with the noise. About 2 years later, a plumber was called to fix our boiler. When he finished, he gave us an old black and white photograph he'd found behind the boiler. It was of a young woman wearing Victorian clothing. Our neighbour, Mrs. Moffat, had lived in her house since the 1950s, so I suggested to my husband we ask her if she knew who it was. She thought it was a lady called Mrs. Ross. Mr. and Mrs. Ross had lived in our house, and Mrs. Moffat said that back in those days our kitchen had been a bedroom, and Mr. Ross, who was a big man and not very mobile, had been sleeping in it. Mrs. Ross used to come to the Moffats' door many nights when they first moved in, as Mr. Ross used to fall out of bed all the time, and Mrs. Ross was not strong enough to get him back in. We suddenly understood where this noise had been coming from. I hope poor Mr. Ross isn't bound to fall out of bed for all eternity. Thank you so much, Alison. Was that really a ghostly man falling out of bed, or are we joining dots that aren't there? Email your thoughts to me, uncanny@bbc.co.uk.